The massive alien ship hung in space like a dark cloud over Earth, its hull reflecting the distant sunlight. Inside, Admiral Cax stood before the War Council, his four arms clasped behind his back as he delivered his report about the primitive planet below. Their weapons still use gunpowder and crude explosives, he said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. Their vehicles run on fossil fuels, and their aircraft can barely reach the edge of their atmosphere. He gestured to the holographic display showing Earth's military bases. They cluster their forces in obvious locations, making them easy targets. The council members nodded in agreement. The Dominion had conquered 32 worlds before Earth, and none had posed a real challenge. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything humans possessed. Their soldiers were genetically engineered for combat, with reinforced bones and enhanced reflexes. Victory was not just expected, it was mathematically certain. "What about orbital bombardment?" asked one of the council members, her scaled skin shifting colors with interest. Admiral Cax shook his head. "The planet's resources are too valuable to risk damage from orbital strikes. Our ground forces alone will be more than sufficient." He pulled up another display, showing the planned landing zones. "We'll begin with simultaneous deployments at these 20 locations. Their militaries will be overwhelmed before they can mount an organized response." The council approved the plan without debate. After all, their combat simulations showed a 99% chance of victory within the first 48 hours. The humans' primitive projectile weapons would be useless against their energy shields, and their armor could stop anything short of a direct hit from their crude explosive devices. 3 days later, the first wave of dropships entered Earth's atmosphere. They descended through the clouds in perfect formation, their stealth systems making them invisible to human radar. The ships landed in carefully chosen locations across the planet, open areas near major military installations, but far enough away to allow their forces to deploy in textbook order. Commander Rix watched with pride as his troops emerged from their dropships. 10,000 warriors, each one a perfect specimen of military science, moved into formation with mechanical precision. Their armor gleamed in the morning sun, and their energy rifles hummed with power. The invasion of this sector would be over before the local sun set. The first sign that something was wrong came when their forward scouts went dark. Not one by one, but 3 entire squads simultaneously. The commander frowned at his tactical display. According to their intelligence, there shouldn't have been any human forces within 50 kilometers of their landing zone. "Status report," he demanded. "Unknown, Commander," his second replied. Their last transmission showed no signs of enemy contact. They simply stopped reporting. Before Rix could respond, explosions erupted across their formation. Not the crude blasts they'd expected from human weapons, but carefully placed charges that had been waiting for them. The perfectly spaced ranks of his troops suddenly became a liability as the explosions channeled them exactly where someone wanted them to go. Then the shooting started. Not from the front where they'd expected resistance, but from multiple directions at once. The humans weren't supposed to be here. They weren't supposed to know where the landing would happen. And they certainly weren't supposed to be able to coordinate an attack like this. Enemy contact. The reports flooded in from all sides, taking fire from the tree line. Snipers in the buildings to the north. They're in the drainage ditches. Commander Rix watched in disbelief as his neat tactical display dissolved into chaos. The humans weren't fighting according to any military doctrine his forces had trained against. They didn't mass their troops for decisive engagement. Instead, they struck from dozens of locations, never staying in one place long enough to be targeted. His warriors, trained to fight in coordinated units, found themselves scattered and isolated. Their superior weapons meant nothing when they couldn't bring them to bear on an enemy that refused to stay visible for more than a few seconds at a time. "This is impossible," he muttered, watching as more unit markers went dark on his display. "They're primitives. They're supposed to be primitives." The commander's thoughts were interrupted by a deafening explosion as a human missile, one that wasn't supposed to be able to penetrate their defenses, struck his command center directly. As emergency alarms blared around him, Rix realized with growing horror that the Dominion had made a terrible mistake. They hadn't found a primitive species ripe for conquest. The reports from Earth's surface made no sense to the Dominion's high command. Every landing zone told the same story. Their forces were being attacked in ways that defied their combat doctrine. Admiral Cax stared at the tactical displays, his confidence replaced by growing concern. "Show me the human resistance at Landing Zone 8, he ordered. The holographic display shifted to show a ground-level view from a combat recorder. What he saw made his scales bristle. The humans were fighting from sewers and drainage pipes. They emerged from underground passages that weren't on any scan, struck hard, and disappeared before return fire could find them. They had turned the urban environment into a maze of death traps and ambush points. "Play the footage from Zone 3, he commanded next. This time, the display showed a forested area. His troops had landed in a perfect clearing, only to discover that the trees themselves had been turned into fighting positions. Humans had built platforms high in the branches, invisible from above. They struck from elevation, vanished into the canopy, and reappeared somewhere else entirely. One of his junior officers approached with another update. "Sir, we've lost contact with the entire western flank of Zone 5. The humans, they're using the terrain against us." The Admiral watched as more footage streamed in. His troops, engineered for peak combat efficiency, were being systematically taken apart by what looked like chaos, but had to be carefully planned strategy. The humans had predicted where they would land. They had prepared the battleground. And now they were executing a battle plan that looked random but was anything but. In Landing Zone 12, a Dominion combat unit advanced down what their scans showed as an empty street. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet collapsed. The entire road had been hollowed out. As the troops fell into the trap, humans appeared in windows and doorways, throwing primitive but effective explosive devices down into the pit. "These primitives," the Admiral muttered, "they don't fight like any species we've encountered." More combat footage played across his screens. Humans using simple smoke devices to blind the Dominion's advanced targeting systems. Troops emerging from supposedly collapsed buildings to attack from behind. Small teams of humans moving through debris and wreckage in ways that seemed impossible for their bulky forms. A message flashed on his primary screen. An urgent report from the ground commander at Zone 7. "They're in the walls." The message read, "They've hollowed out paths through the buildings themselves. We clear a structure, move on, and they reoccupy it through hidden passages. Request immediate evacuation." The Admiral's second-in-command stepped forward, her voice tight with concern. "Sir, our casualties are approaching 12% across all landing zones. We've never lost more than 2% in any previous conquest." Another screen lit up with fresh combat footage. This time, it showed a human combat vehicle, a primitive tracked machine they had dismissed as obsolete. But the humans had hidden these vehicles in underground garages, waiting for the perfect moment. Now they burst from concealment, their main guns roaring, striking at the Dominion's forces from angles their shields weren't oriented to defend. "Look at their movements," the Admiral's combat analyst said, pointing at another screen. "They're not using standard military formations. Each small unit seems to operate independently, but somehow they're coordinating their attacks perfectly. They're hurting our forces, breaking up our formations, isolating our units." The Admiral watched as more tactical displays turned red, indicating lost contact with ground forces. The humans were using their own world as a weapon. Every building was a fortress. Every street was a potential trap. Every shadow could hide an enemy that understood exactly how to hurt them. "Send the reserve forces," he ordered, knowing even as he gave the command that it might be a mistake. "But have them land outside the urban areas. We need to regroup and—" His words were cut off by new alarms. The reserve landing zones, carefully selected open areas away from human settlements, had been mined. Not with advanced explosives, but with simple mechanical devices that their sensors had dismissed as random metal debris. As the dropships descended, the devices detonated in patterns that forced them into killing zones. The Admiral watched in horror as the situation deteriorated further. These weren't the actions of primitives. This was the work of a species that had turned warfare into an art form, a species that had spent its entire history fighting itself, perfecting the craft of combat in ways the Dominion had never imagined possible. Primitives, he said again, but this time the word held no contempt, only fear. We thought they were primitives. The Dominion's military scientists huddled around their monitoring stations, watching in disbelief as their combat simulations failed one after another. These humans weren't following any known patterns of warfare. They were doing things that should have been impossible. "Play that footage again," ordered lead researcher Mox, his eyes fixed on the screen showing a human combat unit operating in what their sensors indicated was total darkness. The humans moved with perfect coordination, navigating obstacles and engaging targets as if in broad daylight. "How are they doing this?" asked his assistant. "Our scans show no energy signatures from advanced night vision technology. Their equipment is purely mechanical." The answer came from another researcher who had been studying captured human gear. "They're using simple tubes with phosphor coating. They amplify existing light, even starlight. It's brilliantly primitive." More footage poured in from the ground forces, humans fighting in frozen conditions that should have limited their mobility. Instead, they moved faster through the snow than the Dominion's troops, using the weather as cover. In desert regions, humans operated for days without resupply, carrying everything they needed on their backs. "Look at this," called out another scientist, pointing to his bioratings. "These humans have been fighting for 3 days straight. No sleep, minimal food. They should be completely exhausted." He shook his head in wonder. "But their combat effectiveness hasn't dropped at all. If anything, they're getting better at killing our forces." Mox moved from station to station, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The humans were adapting their tactics in real time, learning from each engagement. When the Dominion's forces adjusted their shield frequencies, the humans would probe for new weaknesses. When they changed their patrol patterns, the humans would find new ways to ambush them. "Sir," one of the junior researchers called out in alarm, "you need to see this." The main screen lit up with fresh combat footage. A human soldier had been hit by weapons fire that should have been fatal. Instead of falling, the human applied some kind of binding to the wound and kept fighting. More footage showed humans continuing to fight with injuries that would have incapacitated any Dominion warrior. "How is this possible?" Mox demanded. "Run a full biological scan. I want to know what makes them so resilient." The results that came back painted a terrifying picture. Humans had redundant systems throughout their bodies. They could lose significant blood and keep fighting. Their adrenal glands could push them far beyond normal physical limits. Even their bones were designed to repair themselves after breaks. "Sir," one of the researchers said quietly, "I think I know why our combat simulations failed." He pulled up an evolutionary history of Earth. "Look at this. Humans aren't just warriors. They're persistence predators. Their entire bodies evolved for endurance hunting. They would chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion." The implications hit Mox like a physical blow. The Dominion's forces were designed for quick, efficient combat. But humans were built for prolonged warfare. They could fight tired, fight hungry, fight injured, and they had turned these ancient hunting instincts into warfare that defied conventional military logic. A new alert drew their attention. The screen showed human forces attacking the Dominion position in what seemed like a frontal assault, a suicide mission against their superior technology. But as their forces moved to respond, hidden human units struck from multiple directions. The frontal assault had been a lure, drawing them into a complex trap. They're not just adapted for physical combat, Mox realized. Their brains are wired for this. They can process chaotic combat situations and make tactical decisions faster than our combat computers can calculate responses. The research team watched as more data poured in. Humans using primitive radio waves to coordinate complex attacks, using hand signals and pre-planned maneuvers that needed no communication at all, working in small teams that could instantly adapt to changing situations without waiting for orders from higher command. "We thought their technology was primitive," Mox said, his voice heavy with realization. "But that's not what matters in warfare, is it? They've evolved into perfect combat organisms. Everything about them, their bodies, their minds, their instincts, it's all optimized for warfare." He looked at the casualty reports still flowing in from the surface. The Dominion's perfectly engineered warriors were being taken apart by creatures that evolution had spent millions of years turning into the ultimate soldiers. "We didn't find primitives," he said quietly. "We found the most dangerous species in the galaxy. And we made them angry." The Dominion's field commander watched through his command center's view screen as another patrol vanished from the tactical display. They had been tracking what seemed to be a small group of human soldiers through a mountainous region. But somehow, that small group had led his entire patrol into what could only be described as a killing ground. "Replay the last transmission," he ordered, his voice tight with frustration. The screen flickered to life, showing the helmet camera feed from the patrol leader. The rocky terrain looked empty at first, then shapes moved among the stones. Human shapes, covered in patterns that somehow broke up their outlines and made them nearly invisible until they were far too close. The humans didn't rely on active camouflage or energy fields. They had painted their armor and clothes to match the rocks, and they moved in ways that made them blend with the natural shadows. It was primitive, it was simple, and it was terrifyingly effective. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're getting reports from the coastal region. The humans, they're coming from the water." New footage appeared on the screens. Dominion forces had set up a defensive position along the shoreline, their sensors watching for any approach. But the humans had somehow stayed underwater for impossible lengths of time, using simple breathing tanks to move beneath the waves. They emerged from the surf in the darkness, their black suits making them nearly invisible against the night sea. The commander switched to another feed, this one from a forest operation that had gone wrong. His troops had been pursuing human forces through dense woodland when the ground seemingly came alive. Humans had buried themselves in prepared positions, covered in local vegetation. They lay motionless for hours, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "How do they do this?" he demanded. "How do they stay so still for so long? How do they endure such conditions?" More reports flooded in. Humans operating in mountains so high that the air was too thin for most species. Humans fighting in swamps that should have been impassable. Humans appearing from snowstorms that had grounded all Dominion aircraft. The worst reports came from the urban combat zones. Humans had turned their cities into three-dimensional battlefields. They fought from rooftops, sewers, and everything in between. They created hidden passages through buildings, used the debris of combat to make new fighting positions, and seemed to appear and disappear at will. "Sir, you need to see this," his intelligence officer said, pulling up new footage. It showed a group of humans moving through what their scans had indicated was a lethal radiation zone. The humans wore simple protective suits, but according to all their data, it shouldn't have been enough. "Their bodies," the intelligence officer explained, "they can withstand radiation levels that would kill our troops. They've adapted to handle exposure to their planet's natural radiation. Even their primitive protection is enough because their bodies are already hardened against it." The commander watched as more tactical displays turned red. His forces had superior weapons, superior armor, superior technology in every way. But none of that seemed to matter. The humans had turned every environment into a weapon. They had adapted to fight in conditions that should have been impossible. A new alert drew his attention. One of their forward bases had gone dark. The humans had somehow tunneled beneath it, placing simple explosive charges at key structural points. The entire base had collapsed into the ground. As their forces rushed to respond, the humans struck the rescue operation from multiple directions. They're not just fighting us, the commander realized. They're playing with us. Every retreat is a trap. Every weakness is bait. They're using our own tactics against us. More footage showed human soldiers carrying wounded comrades for miles through harsh terrain, refusing to leave anyone behind. It showed humans sharing their last water, their last food, yet continuing to fight at peak efficiency. It showed humans using simple tools to repair their equipment in the field, adapting their weapons and tactics to overcome the Dominion's technological advantages. The commander had fought in dozens of campaigns across the galaxy. He had never seen anything like this. These humans didn't just fight battles. They lived for combat. Every environment was their environment. Every condition was their condition. Every battle was their battle. "Send the report to High Command," he ordered, his voice grim. Tell them we're not fighting soldiers. We're fighting a species that has turned warfare into an art form, and we're losing." Deep within the Dominion's flagship, lead researcher Mox called an emergency meeting of the War Council. The room was silent as he pulled up the latest analysis of human combat capabilities. What he had discovered was about to change everything they thought they knew about warfare. "We've been looking at this all wrong," he began, his hands shaking slightly as he activated the holographic display. "We thought humans were primitive because they hadn't developed energy weapons or gravity control. But they didn't need to. They had something far more powerful, their own evolution." The display showed a human skeleton, highlighted with combat analysis data. Look at their bone structure. Their joints allow for complex movements in any direction. Their muscles can tear and repair themselves stronger than before. Their bodies store energy in ways we never thought possible. He switched to footage from a recent battle. A small group of humans had been cornered by Dominion forces in a destroyed building. Instead of surrendering, they had fought for 3 days straight. No sleep, minimal food. Yet they kept fighting, kept killing, kept winning. "This isn't just about physical capability," Mox continued. "Their brains are unique. They can process multiple threats simultaneously. They can make complex tactical decisions in microseconds. And most importantly, they can do all this while exhausted, injured, or under extreme stress." The council members watched in silence as he played more footage. Humans fighting in complete darkness, using their other senses to navigate and engage targets. Humans communicating complex battle plans with just hand signals and facial expressions. Humans teaching each other new tactics in the middle of combat. "But here's what truly makes them dangerous," Mox said, pulling up new data. "Every human is a potential warrior. Their entire society is built around adapting and overcoming challenges. They turn their weaknesses into strengths. They learn from every defeat. They pass these lessons down to the next generation." He showed them analysis of human combat doctrines throughout their history. "Look at this. Every time they face a superior force, they don't try to match it directly. They find ways around it. They develop new tactics. They adapt their primitive weapons in ways we never imagined possible." The display shifted to show human supply lines. They can live off the land indefinitely. They can repair their equipment with basic tools. Every human soldier is trained to operate independently if needed. They don't need perfect conditions or advanced technology to be lethal. One of the council members spoke up, his voice troubled. "But surely our superior numbers." "Numbers mean nothing," Mox cut him off. "Look at this." He showed footage of a recent battle where a handful of humans had held off an entire Dominion battalion. They choose their battlegrounds. They set the terms of engagement. They make us fight their way, not ours. More data scrolled across the screens. Human soldiers showing incredible accuracy with their primitive projectile weapons. Humans using simple explosives to devastating effect. Humans turning everyday objects into lethal weapons. Their entire history is warfare, Mox explained. Not just organized military conflict, but survival against their own planet. They evolved fighting everything. The environment, wild animals, each other. Every human carries the combat experience of thousands of generations in their very DNA. He pulled up biological scans of human soldiers in combat. Look at their stress responses. When we're under pressure, our bodies try to return to homeostasis. When humans are under pressure, their bodies adapt to perform even better. They literally evolve in real time to meet threats. The council chamber was dead silent now. The implications were staggering. They had spent centuries developing perfect warriors through genetic engineering and advanced technology. But humans had spent millions of years evolving into natural warriors. We thought we were the apex predators of the galaxy, Mox said quietly. We were wrong. Humans don't just fight wars, they embody warfare itself. Every aspect of their biology, their psychology, their society is optimized for combat. They don't need energy weapons or force fields. They turn their own bodies into weapons more effective than anything we could engineer. He looked around the room, meeting each council member's eyes. We didn't invade a primitive planet. We invaded a world that has been producing perfect warriors since before our species learned to walk. And now those warriors are teaching us exactly why that was a mistake. The Dominion's command ship shuddered as another human missile somehow breached their defensive screen. Admiral Cax steadied himself against his command console, watching as more red warning indicators lit up across his tactical display. The humans weren't just fighting back anymore. They were hunting his forces. Status report, he demanded, though he already knew it would be bad news. We've lost contact with 30% of our ground forces, his tactical officer reported. The humans, they're not just defeating our troops. They're taking our equipment, learning how it works, and turning it against us. The main screen showed footage from what had once been their primary forward base. The humans had spent 3 days probing its defenses, losing soldiers to its automated defense systems. But with each loss they learned, they mapped out the sensors, found the blind spots, discovered exactly how the defenses worked. Then they struck. Not with a massive force, but with small teams that slipped through the gaps they'd discovered. They didn't try to overpower the base's defenses, they bypassed them completely. By the time the base commander realized they were inside, it was too late. Show me the urban combat zones, Cax ordered. The display shifted to their forces trying to hold territory in human cities. It was a nightmare. The humans had turned every building into a fortress, every street into a killing ground. They appeared from windows, doorways, and storm drains, struck with devastating effect, and vanished before return fire could find them. More concerning was how they'd adapted to Dominion technology. They'd learned that their shields had blind spots at certain angles. Now every attack came from those angles. They'd discovered that their sensors couldn't track targets moving at certain speeds. Now they always moved at exactly those speeds. Sir, his intelligence officer called out, "You need to see this." The display showed human soldiers wearing pieces of salvaged Dominion armor. They hadn't just taken it, they'd modified it, combining it with their own equipment in ways the Dominion's engineers had never considered. They used captured energy weapons alongside their projectile weapons, switching between them to exploit whatever weakness they found. These humans, Cax muttered, they don't fight like a military force. They fight like predators, his second-in-command finished. They study their prey, learn its weaknesses, then strike without mercy. New alerts flashed across the screens. The humans had begun targeting their supply lines, not with large forces, but with small teams that appeared from nowhere, destroyed vital equipment, and disappeared into the landscape. They didn't try to hold territory. They simply made it impossible for the Dominion to hold it either. The Admiral watched as another base fell to human attackers. They had used simple smoke generators to blind the base's advanced sensors, then attacked from underground tunnels they'd spent days digging. The base's heavy weapons, designed to repel a frontal assault, were useless against enemies that were already inside the perimeter. "Look at their tactics," the tactical officer said, pointing to another screen. They're not trying to match our technology. They're negating it, making it irrelevant. He pulled up more footage. They've learned to jam our communications with simple broadcast interference. They're using our own sensor systems to track our movements. They've even figured out how to fool our targeting systems with heat decoys. The ship shuddered again as another missile found its mark. The humans had observed their fleet's defensive patterns and found a way to slip their primitive weapons through gaps in their coverage. The missiles weren't powerful enough to destroy their ships, but they didn't need to. They just needed to keep the fleet distracted while the real battle was won on the ground. "Sir," the communications officer called out, his voice tight with worry, "we're losing contact with more ground units. The humans, they're not just attacking anymore. They're systematically taking apart our entire invasion force." Admiral Cax watched as more tactical displays turned red. The humans had learned, adapted, evolved their tactics. His perfect military machine, with all its advanced technology and superior weapons, was being dismantled by creatures who had turned warfare into an art form. "We didn't understand," he said quietly. "We thought superior technology meant superior fighting ability. But the humans..." He watched another ground unit disappear from his tactical display. "They don't just fight wars. They perfect them." The emergency meeting of the Dominion High Council was interrupted by another impact that shook the flagship. The humans had adapted their missile guidance systems faster than anyone thought possible. They were now hitting targets in high orbit with frightening accuracy. "We have lost 60% of our ground forces," Admiral Cax reported to the grim-faced council members. "The rest are cut off, surrounded, or in full retreat. The humans..." He paused, searching for the right words. "The humans are not just defeating us. They're hunting us down." The main display showed their remaining forces trying to reach emergency extraction points. But the humans had studied their retreat protocols. They knew exactly where the Dominion troops would go, and they had prepared accordingly. Every escape route became a gauntlet of ambushes and traps. "Show them the new footage," lead researcher Mox said quietly. The screen shifted to show human forces using captured Dominion weapons and vehicles. They hadn't just learned to use them, they had improved them. They stripped away the complex targeting systems and relied on their natural abilities instead. They modified the power systems to work with their primitive power sources. "This is unprecedented," one council member said. "They're not just adapting to our technology. They're making it better by making it simpler." More tactical displays showed the extent of their defeat. The humans had learned to track their stealth ships by watching for disturbances in the rain. They found their cloaked troops by looking for footprints in the mud. They located their bases by monitoring local animal behavior patterns. "We tried to fight them with technology," Mox explained. "But they fought us with experience earned through thousands of years of warfare. Our troops are trained to follow protocols. Their warriors are trained to think, to adapt, to overcome." Another impact rocked the ship. The humans were using their own destroyed vehicles as makeshift missiles now, launching them into orbit with modified engines. They didn't need to cause serious damage. They just needed to keep the Dominion fleet off balance. "The worst part," Admiral Cax said, bringing up new footage, "is that we haven't even seen their full capabilities." The display showed massive human armies still in reserve, weapons they hadn't yet deployed, resources they hadn't committed to the fight. "They're not desperate to win," he continued. "They're being methodical, taking their time, learning everything they can about how we fight. If we stay..." He let the thought hang in the air. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. They had arrived expecting to find primitive creatures ready for conquest. Instead, they had found natural warriors who had spent their entire history preparing for this moment, even if they didn't know it. "Look at this," Mox said, showing new analysis. "Their bodies can heal from injuries that would kill our troops. They can fight for days with minimal sleep. They can survive on almost any food source. And most importantly," he highlighted brain scan data, "they enjoy this. The challenge, the adaptation, the conquest. It's all part of their natural drive. Another council member spoke up. But surely with our superior technology. Our technology means nothing. Cax cut in. They don't try to match it. They find ways to make it useless. We have energy shields. They attack from angles the shields don't cover. We have advanced targeting systems. They use smoke and mirrors, literally, to blind them. We have superior weapons. They get so close that our weapons' power works against us. More impacts shook the ship. The humans had figured out the fleet's defensive formation and were now launching coordinated strikes to force them to break it apart. We must withdraw, Cax said finally, not just from this battle, but from this entire sector of space. The humans. He looked around the council chamber. The humans aren't just defeating us. They're learning from us, studying us. If we stay, they won't just drive us off their world. They'll follow us back to ours. The council voted quickly after that. The order went out across all frequencies, full withdrawal from Earth. As the Dominion fleet broke orbit and flowed into deep space, they left behind not just a battlefield, but a terrible realization. They hadn't found a primitive species ready for harvesting. They had found the galaxy's perfect warriors, and they had just taught those warriors how to reach the stars.